right, today we're going to talk about annotating your article. Article of the week, don't do it every week, but annotating is something you need to learn to do, and I thought maybe you'd understand it better if we thought about it like Netflix. So annotating, what do I want you to do? So think about, when you watch a video on Netflix, you don't have to just sit straight through it. You don't have to watch commercials, but you do get the opportunity to stop whenever you want to and think about it. You can even rewind and look at it again. It's not even called rewinding anymore, I don't think. So first of all, think of your navigation bar at the bottom of your Netflix. Number one thing that annotating asks you to do is to pause. I want you to stop at each paragraph and think about it. Now, as you reach a more advanced level, you'll stop within the paragraph, not just wait to the end of the paragraph, because you'll have questions or something you want to make a note about. But definitely, for now, every time you read a paragraph, the second time through, you should have something to say about it, or there's something you should think about it. Think about the play button then. Play means you let yourself think things all the way through. So when you're reading through the article, try and think it through to the next level. So if you're reading a paragraph and it doesn't mean anything to you, ask yourself why. Why doesn't this mean anything to me? Or if it does it not mean anything because you don't understand it? And in that case, you should ask a question. If you think it means something and you're not sure, again, you ask a question. So questions are something we annotate with. Think about turning up the volume, and in this case we're asking you to turn up the volume on your thinking. So as you read, I want you to write down what you're thinking and specifically what you think the author is saying. So in some cases you're summarizing, but in the future if you were to try to study from this, having those notes there would help you, and it also shows me that you understand what the author is trying to say. Now whether you are right or wrong doesn't matter as much as the fact that you're actually writing it down. So it shows me your thinking. You're making your thinking visible, which is why this is so important. And now I know the reload symbol is not necessarily part of Netflix, but reading it over again. So I, as your teacher, am a pretty sophisticated reader, but I don't often get the meaning of something until the third time I've read the article of the week. So that's why we have you read it through once, read through a second time to ask some questions, look for hard words, make connections, and then the third time, really think about it, because it might take a while before you understand what it's saying, and that's really a skill that you need as a 21st century learner. So if you don't know what you're reading, ask a question. Don't just zone out. We don't want the whoops, something got wrong symbol to come up. Remember, some articles a week are about picking apart the information in the article, and others are really there to make you stop and ask some questions. So, still watching? Good, because now we're going to jump to the article that you were working on this week. And this is the first article, which in some ways was easier because it's a summary, but in other ways was not as easy. And so rather than me walk you through it in class, I'm going to show you my thinking here. So anytime we use the little infinity symbol, that means that we are making a connection. So as we read through paragraph 3, because we should have numbered these, we saw cultural, political, economic, and social, and that makes me think of the knowledge map. Another question that I asked is, they're really trying to get this idea across to you that the people who ended up being slaves were not just slaves, they were individuals. And I do kind of wonder, can you shape your destiny if you're a slave? Like, can you really do that? I mean, you're a slave. Isn't that the whole point? So as we go through here, the things that are highlighted are just trying to point out to you that this gave me an idea. And then the idea I wrote over on the side. So the story of the way in which enslaved human beings made themselves history and culture makers and transformed themselves. I noticed that they are very intentionally not just calling people slaves. And so why do you think that is? And that's a question I might ask of you in the future, but it's good for you to notice that and just write that down. History and culture makers is maybe something you know what that means, maybe you don't, but this would be something you could comment on. Who makes culture? How do people make culture? All right, in this next paragraph, sometimes what we do is we just kind of summarize, and often the left-hand side is a better place for this, especially when you have the vocab on the right. What's the main idea of the paragraph? So this paragraph is saying that they're drawing on recent scholarship. They're offering the public, black as well as white, a unique opportunity to discover the compelling history of the American past, facts that until recently have been unavailable to the public for study and reflection. So it makes me want to know, first of all, why weren't these facts available before? What's happened? Will we answer that in class? I don't know. And then clearly their point is this is not just for African Americans to study. This is for everyone. And I think that's really significant because they're going to come back to that again. And it might be something that stands out to you. You might ask this as a question instead, like, why not just black people? In the next paragraph, sometimes you just make a notation of something like, wow, that's a lot. So if I ask you in question in class, like, what's something that stood out to you? You might say, wow, there were 5.5 million Africans that were brought to America. And again, here's our connection symbol, connecting to the video we watched about the slave ships with all the little dots going across the ocean. As we move on to the second page, this paragraph is now kind of introducing you to the big idea behind the articles. And in this final sentence, it says 450,000, those people that came to the United States, grew to 4 million by 1860, and now it's 40 million today. So the question is, if the slave trade wasn't happening, how did this happen? There's something there that makes me wonder, how did that number grow, especially when I did not see a lot of ships going to America on the video we watched. All right, in the next paragraph, they're going to ease you into getting at their central idea and coming back to the idea of economic, political, and social. I think it's really interesting to know, and maybe you didn't realize this when you read this, but what they're saying here is not something that necessarily everyone would agree with, that the slave trade and slavery were the two most powerful forces shaping the development of the American nation. That's a big statement. Aren't there other things that built our country that were equally as important, like people who came here by choice, like immigrants, the wars we fought, things like that? So it's okay to disagree with the article because they're making a very powerful statement there. And that's not always easy to do. It took me till about the fourth time reading this before I thought, oh, maybe that's something I should comment on. And this next paragraph is kind of pointing out to you, again, why this history is for everyone, not just for African Americans. And so a comment you might write, you might respond to that personally and say, I don't like learning about bad things in the past because of this. Maybe it's not because you're ashamed or you feel like you're going to have to feel bad. Or again, why would someone be embarrassed? They can't do anything about it. Respond to that. The author's assuming that you're afraid of what they're talking about. You can have a reflection on that, or you can ask a question. All right, continuing to move down here. They're going to start to challenge in this article what we're thinking. And what they're saying is that the images that we have of slavery come to us from a certain time in history. And they cover 500 years, and so it's just good to make a note for yourself. That's about the year 1500. And these are some of the images that they have, right? We know the start of the story, that it is these helpless, defenseless victims, people who were treated badly. We know that. We can make a connection here to slave stories. But it makes you say, like, okay, yeah, I do know that's true, but what you're telling me I'm missing something. What am I missing? What's the part I'm missing out on? Just a couple things in the next paragraph. So we're on to the third page now. When it says spoon fashion, that makes me think of the paintings that we looked at in class with the people chained to the bottom of the ship. They really didn't show them as close together as they probably were packed, right up next to each other. This is a question that a student asked in class already, but, did slaves work on something other than a plantation? It says they worked on tobacco, cotton, and sugar plantations. Did they work anywhere else? That's a great question to ask. And now at this part, what I've done on the left is I'm trying to summarize and get the main idea of what they're trying to say, because they're throwing a lot of things at me and saying, you think it's this is what you think it is. And I kind of feel like, yeah, I do think that's what it is. So what we know is slavery at its worst. So what we know already, the summary of this paragraph is slavery at its worst. Or is it just these images get the strongest reaction? So what they're saying is the images that we see were picked to be very powerful and picked to make people feel bad. So photographs of escaped slaves with scars from whips. That was meant to get a reaction from people and make them feel like maybe slavery should be over. Does that mean that wasn't a real photograph? No, absolutely not. That was accurate, but it doesn't show 100% of the picture. So part of why they chose such powerful images is if you think about that Jefferson Davis quote, he was saying how slavery was so great, so they needed really, really strong images, photographs, and stories to change people's minds. And so I think this part's really significant where it said graphic, visual, and narrative pictures of the brutal and dehumanizing nature of the slave trade. So what I'm saying in red here, I think what this means is that most people can't really relate to slavery. If you haven't experienced it, which let's be honest, none of us have, we really have no idea what it's like. So to choose a really horrifying picture of someone being treated badly is very effective. It grabs people's attention. Think of like ads you see that pop up on Netflix that make you, or sorry, not Netflix, but anywhere on the internet that make you kind of pull your attention away. That was the purpose of this. So they're saying this is important information. It's correct, but it's not the whole picture. As you can tell in this next paragraph, sometimes it's good to notice what the author's doing. It says, Black victimization has until recently, so they're telling you, hey, something's changed. It comes to be seen as more, now understood to be more. That means, okay, it's not that it wasn't horrible, that's true, but what is new? And what they're getting across to you in this introduction is that these are individuals, they're not just people known as slaves. Every single person was an individual and had all of the true emotions that an individual has. All right, going on, here's another paragraph I thought was a good connection to Guns, Germs, and Steel when they talked about the underdevelopment of Africa and how that happened. So the book, they're saying, is different because what it does is it points out in the context of slavery, Africans invented and reproduced themselves and laid the foundation for social, political, cultural, and economic development. So the point is, yes, slavery was awful, horrible, but this really cool, really rich culture came from it thanks to the work of African Americans. And a question that I have here is, they were victimized, exploited, oppressed, all very, very bad verbs. But they were also active, creative agents. That means they made their own history. And apparently, it is possible to be both a victim and to change your future. I don't think we always think of it that way. All right, we're getting closer to the end here, but the last couple things to talk about is kind of getting you set up into what the book is going to do, and that's what the other articles that your classmates are reading. So kind of guiding our thinking over here, it says there's diverse ways in which oppressed people have been able to confront and kind of rise above being oppressed. So instead of asking, why didn't they fight back, which is something I've heard students ask over and over, the question is really, how did they fight back? I'm not going to assume that people didn't fight back. I'm going to assume they didn't like this and they did fight back. We could ask why they weren't always successful, or maybe we should ask how were they successful? In what ways did they change slavery because they fought back? So just because history doesn't tell us something doesn't mean it didn't happen. That's something to think about, right? Just because it wasn't written down doesn't mean it didn't happen. Although I do think, just from what I know about slavery, it's starting to feel like living, surviving, winning. You're a slave. Are you winning? This seems awfully positive to me. How are you winning if you're still a slave? And then as we get to these last few paragraphs, they really aren't that important to what we're trying to do in class today. So we can read through them, but we don't really have to annotate them closely. It's just like reading the historic fiction book for class. You don't have to read the entire thing. And so again, it's making the ESP connection. So hopefully you now get an idea of what it is I need you to do when you're annotating. Hopefully you'll pause this video and go back when you need to write something down.